Understanding Dementia, Part 3, Dementia and the Brain. Healthy human brains have billions of brain cells, or neurons, that communicate with each other through neural pathways, a bit like long arms and legs that reach out to each other. Everything we think, say, and do is a product of our brain cells communicating with each other. So, how does dementia affect the brain? With Alzheimer's disease, the brain cells are no longer able to communicate with each other because amyloid protein deposits clump together and over time become amyloid plaques. These plaques build up between the cells, causing a barrier in communication pathways. As mentioned, there's also a problem with a second type of protein. When tau protein malfunctions, it causes the scaffolding of the cell itself to collapse, which causes tangles to form. When this happens, neurons lose their ability to function and eventually die. With vascular dementia, brain cells eventually shrink and die because the important oxygen, nutrients, and glucose that are transported through our blood vessels are cut off. Kind of like a plant that doesn't get enough water, that area of the brain will eventually shrink and die. Blood supply can be cut off when an artery, vessel, or capillary is clogged, or if it bursts, like when someone experiences a hemorrhage. Lewy bodies are abnormal protein deposits that build up inside the brain cells. Like with Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, the abnormal proteins will cause the brain cells to stop working properly and eventually also cause the brain cell to shrink and die, once again causing a disruption in the neural pathway. While there are several different diseases that cause dementia, they eventually become quite similar in their symptoms. Eventually, they lead to pronounced shrinking of the brain, or atrophy. This image demonstrates what the brain of someone with very advanced Alzheimer's disease would look like. Although this is not a very pleasant image to look at or discuss, it is important that we understand and recognize that there is a disease happening in the person's brain that is causing their symptoms. Oftentimes, a person with dementia looks quite healthy, maybe even normal on the outside, which makes it difficult for caregivers, family members, and friends to make sense of their symptoms. And in fact, we hear from people living with dementia that this is one of the most difficult reactions that they receive. What do you mean you have dementia? You look fine. This image can help us work through our understanding by reminding us that the person with dementia's brain is changing in size, weight, and volume. They are not in control of their symptoms, and the normal pathways of communication between brain cells have permanently changed. They are not doing things on purpose. So what do you notice when you look at the two sides of the brain in this image? The first is what we call global atrophy. The brain, the healthy brain on the left-hand side, is much bigger. There are more brain cells, and on the right, the brain cells have died and the brain itself has shrunk. The second thing that we notice is enlarged ventricles. That are naturally fluid-filled spaces in the brain. They exist in all of our brains, but as dementia progresses and brain cells die, those ventricles get larger. A very important thing to notice, particularly with Alzheimer's, but also other forms of dementia, is that the hippocampus, which is the area circled here. In a healthy human brain, it's about the size of a walnut, and that's the part of our brain that is involved with short-term memory processing. It is essentially the part of the brain, I think of it as the part of the brain that writes down memories, and it's that writing down that turns the memory into a long-term memory. On the right-hand side, you can see how profoundly shrunken it is in someone with advanced Alzheimer's. This means that that part of the brain no longer captures long-term memories or captures them very intermittently. This is very important to remember because it helps when dealing with either yourself as someone with dementia or if you are caring for someone with dementia. When someone says, "I don't remember," or "that didn't happen," it doesn't matter how many times you try to cue them because their brain has not written it down. If our brains don't write it down, it didn't happen. So if you are the person living with dementia, does this image help you understand some of the changes that you have experienced? If you're caring for someone living with dementia, does this image help you understand why the person you are caring for has changed? This slide will hopefully go a little further to help you understand and make sense of the symptoms you are seeing or experiencing, or that you might see or experience in the future. In very, very basic terms, we're going to look at the key functions of specific areas of the brain and what changes you might see with damage to those regions. The occipital lobe at the back of our head processes vision and the ability to see and combine colors, shapes, angles, and movement into meaningful patterns. Changes that can be seen with damage to this part of the brain are perceptual difficulties, loss of depth perception, the inability to see or to judge movement. Note that this is very important for driving. This is the part of the brain that allows us to judge how far away is that car from me, or how fast is that car moving towards me. It also, we can see changes to peripheral or to up and down vision. The parietal lobes, located just above the occipital lobe, put activities in a sequence, such as putting clothes on in the right order, using tools, or performing tasks that require a logical sequence, such as starting and driving a car, or making coffee in a coffee maker. This part of our brain controls our ability to understand spatial information, such as where we are in a specific environment and where other objects are. Wernicke's area is connected to speech comprehension. It's located bordering the parietal and temporal lobes for most people on the left side of the brain. Changes that may be seen with damage to the parietal lobe is difficulty in understanding what others say, inability to express thoughts clearly in writing, difficulty handling bank accounts or paying bills. The person may get lost easily, or there may be changes in their ability to find their way. They may have difficulty putting on clothing or tying shoes. There may be balance and gait difficulties. And the symptoms will vary depending on whether the damage is on the right or the left side of the brain. I mentioned the hippocampus. This is the short-term memory processing center. It's where verbal and visual memories are processed. Verbal memories are words, memories related to what we read or say or hear. Visual memory lets us recognize objects, faces, and places to guide us around our environment. The temporal lobes on the left side is related to language. Both are related to new learning. Changes that may be seen with damage to these parts of the brain are an inability to retain memory of the recent past. The person may be living in the present moment, and therefore, if you are not currently in front of them, then you have never been there or haven't been there in a very long time. There may be a loss of vocabulary, an inability to recognize familiar faces, objects, or places. The frontal lobe, right at the very front of just behind our forehead, initiates activity and lets us plan and organize our actions. It enables us to look ahead in time, to schedule tasks and devise ways to achieve goals. It regulates our social judgment and behavior, such as knowing what behavior is appropriate to a situation, interpreting the feelings of other people, and monitoring our own actions. This part of the brain is involved with attention, focus, concentration, and with complex thinking and problem solving. With damage to this part of the brain, the person may appear apathetic or uninterested. The person may have difficulty focusing or maintaining their concentration. They may stop hobbies or other activities that they previously enjoyed. They may quickly lose interest in an activity. They may seem content to sit or not respond to others. They may withdraw from others. The flip side is that they may be unable to stop an activity, repeating it over and over once started. And there may be inappropriateness, whether verbal, physical, or sexual. The limbic system is affected early on in Alzheimer's disease. It's involved with memory and emotion. It links the lobes of the brain, enabling them to connect behavior with memories. It controls emotion and basic needs, such as sleeping and eating. Our circadian rhythm, which is our sleep and wake cycle, and the emotional brain. The limbic system helps us to generate emotions. The cortex, the thinking brain, helps us think about and respond to our emotions. Changes that may be seen with damage to this part of the brain is difficulty finding objects and remembering where they were placed, suspiciousness, irritability, depression, or anxiety. If you have questions about the information you've heard, or any other questions about living with dementia, or just need to speak to someone about your journey with dementia, please don't hesitate to call one of our FirstLink Dementia helplines, Monday to Friday between 9 and 4. If you want to review the information presented in this section, you might want to go to the Alzheimer's Society of Canada's Interactive Brain Tour, found at braintour.alzheimer.ca. That's braintour, all one word, .alzheimer.ca. Next, in part 4, we'll look at the progression of the disease and what symptoms may appear.